Fáilte, and welcome to this video where we're going to talk about the single grain double barrel from Two Stacks. The single grain double barrel is a celebration of grain whisky. Now, most people don't know this, but the majority of whisky made in Ireland is grain whisky, and that grain whisky is mostly used in blended whiskies. I'll try to explain that in a little more detail as it can be a little awkward to wrap your head around. Grain whisky is a legally defined category or style of Irish whisky, and it can be made from any of the grains that we make whisky from. But interestingly enough, the majority of grain whisky made in Ireland is actually made from corn or maize. And we've made whisky from corn or maize since the 1800s. Now, truth be told, we don't actually grow much corn or maize in Ireland, so we import it to make whisky. And the majority of this corn now comes to us from France. In the spirit of transparency, we talk here on the bottle about how this is a column distilled whisky, as legally grain whisky has to be distilled this way in Ireland. A column still or coffee still or patent still or a continuous still, known by all those names, is an Irish invention. Invented in 1830 by a taxman turned distiller Aeneas Coffey. So in Ireland, we have known that corn and the column still work really well together, and we've been using that process to make whisky for an awful long time. The history books tell us that the aforementioned Dundalk distillery installed a coffee still in the mid-1800s and that there was a fire in a corn kiln in 1862. So let's break it down. Single on a whisky label in Ireland means that the whisky is made at one single distillery. Again, with transparency to the fore at Two Stacks, we tell you that this whisky is distilled and matured at the Great Northern Distillery, which coincidentally enough is in Dundalk. We also let you know the breakdown of the casks that we use to craft this whisky, with 50% of this aged in ex-bourbon casks and 50% of this aged in ex-Oloroso sherry casks. And there is some great history wrapped up in those cask types. Historically, up until the 1950s, the vast majority of Irish whisky was aged in ex-fortified wine barrels. So think sherry from the south of Spain, port from northern Portugal, think Madeira from the Madeira Islands, or Marsala from Sicily. Those being the fortified wine producing regions that most people would know. So, back in those days, a wine merchant in Dublin, Cork, Belfast, Galway, etc. would bring the fortified wine into their cellars in the cask. This fortified wine would arrive on a boat from those regions into their cellars, and then the wine would be bottled by the wine merchant there. So, what did they do with all those empty casks? Well, the Irish, being the Irish, decided they would send them down to the local distillery and they would fill them with some of the new make spirit that would go on to become whisky. So, for hundreds of years, we've used ex-fortified wine casks for our whisky maturation. Now, in the 1950s, our friends at Powers discovered that the wonderful Americans had written their bourbon production laws so that the virgin charred oak containers that are used in bourbon production could only be used once. So they weren't allowed to be used for a second aging of bourbon whisky. So we started using those for Irish whisky maturation from the 1950s onwards. The vast majority of Irish whisky is now aged in ex-bourbon barrels, and our friends in Scotland, Japan and in Mexico love the fact that we get these beautifully, softly seasoned ex-bourbon barrels that we use to mature our Irish whisky in. So, single grain, we are celebrating grain whisky with this bottling. In Ireland, grain whisky is the workhorse whisky. It is more often than not the base whisky in the majority of blended Irish whisky that you see out there, and we really don't talk about it as a style and rarely do we celebrate it. We love to give the impression that all Irish whisky is made from barley from those beautiful fields that you see with a gentle breeze blowing through it surrounded by wonderful mature oak trees. But the reality is that the majority of Irish whisky, grain whisky, is made from corn. So mash bill wise in this, we have a mash of 95% corn and 5% malted barley. And as we've already touched on, we divide this in two, into both ex-bourbon and ex-Oloroso sherry casks. It weighs in at 43% ABV, 86 proof, so just off the floor, and in terms of its aromas and flavours, everybody will obviously have their own take on this. Grain whisky to me is a lighter and fresher style of Irish whisky that allows flavour to be added from the influence of the casks used in its aging. To my palate, there is a fresh floral character and a light creamy nuttiness and a hint of caramel and vanilla that come from the ex-bourbon casks. The ex-Oloroso sherry cask brings a punch to the palate. Think a boxer's uppercut to follow up on the jab of the ex-bourbon, and that is dried fruits, raisins, currants, figs and dates. And I know that a lot of our bartender friends out there love working with this from a flavour perspective. The single grain double barrel from Two Stacks is offered here in the US at 43% ABV, 86 proof, and is available in both 100 milliliter dram in a can format and in 700 ml bottles. Sláinte.